The boarding door slammed shut with a hollow thud, and a voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "Ma'am, you need to step off this aircraft. Now!" Every head turned. A pause stretched. The engines hummed. And the woman they were pointing at did not move. She stood in the aisle with one hand on the seat back, the other gripping a slim leather folder. Late afternoon light slanted through the oval windows, catching the fine dust in the air. Her face was calm, almost still. Too still. The kind of stillness that comes from discipline, not fear. Her name was Lillian Brooks, 54 years old, grey beginning to thread her close-cropped hair. No jewelry except a simple watch with a worn leather band. She looked like a school administrator heading home after a long conference, not someone about to be escorted off a flight in front of 200 strangers. The attendant blocking her path was young, rigid jaw tight. His badge trembled as the plane vibrated beneath them. "This is a compliance issue," he said louder now, as if volume could turn doubt into truth. "We'll resolve it at the gate." A man in the first row leaned into the aisle voice, low, sharp. She already passed boarding. "What's the problem?" The attendant didn't answer him. His eyes never left Lillian. Behind her, a woman coughed into her fist. Somewhere farther back, a seatbelt clicked open then closed again. Phones stayed down. People her age knew better. Scenes like this had a way of punishing witnesses. Lillian drew a slow breath. She could smell the recycled air, the faint coffee, the plastic of new upholstery. She felt the pulse in her neck steady itself. She had learned long ago how to keep her body from betraying her thoughts. "I'm not causing a disturbance," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't plead. It landed. "If there's a question, ask it. Don't order me." The attendant glanced toward the galley. A second attendant appeared older. Careful eyes, lips pressed thin. He spoke softly, but his words carried. "We received an alert. Secondary review. It happens." Lillian's gaze shifted to him. A flicker gone as fast as it came. "To whom?" The older attendant hesitated. That was the first crack. He looked past her toward the front where a woman sat rigid in her seat, fingers clenched around a phone she was not recording with. The woman's face was flushed. She wore a cream blazer and pearls that clicked softly when she moved. Eleanor Price, early 50s, the posture of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around her. Eleanor met Lillian's eyes and looked away first. The engines dropped in pitch. A ripple of unease ran through the cabin. A retired firefighter in the exit row shifted his knee, bouncing once before he forced it still. He had seen this posture before. Authority misfiring. Pride tightening. Lillian felt the weight of the folder in her hand. Inside were printed notes from a meeting that had ended an hour earlier, ink smudged where her thumb had pressed too hard. She had left that building thinking about data flows and safety redundancies, not this narrow aisle and the thin line between procedure and pretext. "Ma'am," the younger attendant said again, closer now. Too close. His breath smelled of mint. "Please." There it was. The word that carried an expectation of compliance without explanation. Lillian turned her head just enough to look at the people behind her. An older black man in a tweed jacket met her eyes and gave the smallest nod. A woman with silver hair clasped her hands together, lips moving in a silent count. They were all measuring the same thing, how far this would go. "I will step aside," Lillian said, and the relief on the attendant's face was immediate, almost indecent. But not like this. She moved slowly into the galley. The metal floor was cold through her soles. The door to the cockpit remained closed. She could hear voices inside, muted, urgent. Paper rustled. A tablet chimed once sharp. Eleanor Price leaned into the aisle, her voice pitched just right to sound concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked. No one in particular. Her eyes flicked toward the first attendant. A reminder. A nudge. Lillian saw it then, clear as a diagram. The choreography. The pressure applied sideways, not head-on. She remembered boardrooms where men smiled and said nothing, while decisions were made elsewhere. She remembered the years it took to learn that silence was not neutrality. The older attendant cleared his throat. "Captain's been notified," he said, "careful now. We'll need a moment." A moment stretched. The air thickened. The retired firefighter spoke again, louder this time. "If she's not a threat, why are we stopped?" No one answered him. In the cockpit, the captain read the alert again. He was 62 shoulders squared by decades of habit. The language was precise. "Potential compliance risk. Secondary verification recommended." He looked at the timestamp. He looked at the gate number. He thought about licenses, about headlines, about the way one decision could echo for years. "Get me operations," he said. Back in the galley, Lillian closed her eyes for half a second. She felt the old anger stir, the one she kept banked because it burned too hot to be useful. She pressed it down, layered over it, the steadier thing she trusted. Patience with teeth. The older attendant's radio crackled. His face changed as he listened. Color drained, then returned in a rush. He nodded once, stiff. Understood. The younger attendant swallowed. Eleanor Price's phone vibrated against her palm. She didn't look at it. "Ma'am," the older attendant said, and now the respect was unmistakable. "We're going to return to the gate." A collective exhale swept the cabin, followed by a chorus of murmurs. A woman laughed once, brittle. "Figures," someone said. The engines powered down, the vibration easing. Eleanor rose halfway from her seat. "That's unnecessary," she said too quickly. "I'm sure this can be cleared up." The older attendant met her gaze and did not look away. "We have instructions." Lillian stepped back into the aisle. She felt the looks, now the recalibration. Curiosity replacing dismissal. The plane rolled slow, deliberate toward the terminal. Outside, a ground vehicle paused, lights blinking. Lillian took her seat, not in triumph, not yet. She rested the folder on her lap and folded her hands over it. Her pulse was steady. Her mind was already moving ahead, mapping consequences, weighing the cost of what had just been set in motion. She did not know who would be standing at the gate when the door opened. She did know this, what had begun as a quiet nudge, would not end quietly. The system had noticed, and once it noticed, it never looked away. The jet bridge locked into place with a dull, metallic shudder, and the cabin fell into a silence that felt heavier than the air itself. People stopped pretending not to watch. Necks craned. Spines straightened. Whatever this was, it had crossed the line from inconvenience into something else. Lillian Brooks stayed seated. Her hands rested loosely on the folder, fingers relaxed by force of habit. She had learned never to telegraph tension. Across the aisle, Eleanor Price's knee bounced once before she pressed it still with the edge of her heel. Her smile had disappeared. In its place sat calculation, sharp and restless. The front door opened. Cool air slipped inside, carrying the faint smell of fuel and rain-soaked concrete. Two men in dark suits stepped aboard, followed by a woman with silver hair pulled into a low knot. No airline smiles. No rushed apologies. Their eyes moved fast, cataloguing faces, uniforms, posture. The woman spoke first. Captain Hall. He emerged from the cockpit cap tucked under his arm, expression set. "Ma'am, I'm Susan Calder," she said. "Corporate compliance." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We need to speak with the passenger seated in row 3 aisle." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Eleanor's head snapped up. "That's me," she said quickly, already standing. "There's been a misunderstanding." Susan Calder did not look at her. Her gaze moved instead to Lillian. "Miss Brooks," she said, precise, respectful. "Would you be willing to step off the aircraft with us?" The cabin inhaled as one. Lillian rose, not hurried, not hesitant. The older black man in tweed watched her pass. Eyes narrowed something like recognition, flickering there. The silver-haired woman clasped her hands tighter, lips pressed thin with a satisfaction she would deny later. Eleanor turned fully now. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharpened by disbelief. "I was the one who raised the concern." Susan Calder met her eyes at last. The look was cool, professional, unmoved. "Yes, Ms. Price. We're aware." The words landed wrong. Eleanor felt it immediately. She reached for her phone, then stopped. Too many eyes. Too many cameras that were not supposed to be there. On the jet bridge, the noise of the cabin faded into a low hum. Lillian stepped onto the rubberized floor and felt the temperature drop. The glass walls reflected her back at herself. 54. Lines earned honestly. A woman who had learned over decades when to speak and when to wait. Susan walked beside her. The two men followed a step behind. "This won't take long," Susan said. "But it does need to be documented." "I assumed as much," Lillian replied. They entered a small conference room just off the gate. Fluorescent lights, a table bolted to the floor, an American flag in the corner slightly crooked. Susan gestured for Lillian to sit, then took the chair across from her. "Do you know why the aircraft was flagged?" Susan asked. Lillian met her gaze. "Because a procedure was misused," she said, "and because someone assumed they could apply pressure without consequence." Susan's mouth tightened almost a smile. "You've done this before." "I've lived in this country a long time," Lillian said. "Patterns repeat." Susan opened a tablet, swiped once. "For the record, can you confirm your full name and date of birth?" Lillian did. Calm. Exact. "And your reason for travel today?" "Returning home," Lillian said. "After a closed-door briefing with the Transportation Safety Oversight Council." Susan's fingers paused above the screen. Just a fraction of a second. "Enough." "I see," Susan said. She resumed typing. "And your seat assignment, row 3 aisle. Confirmed. No changes requested." Susan nodded. "Thank you." Outside the room, Eleanor Price paced the jet bridge heels, striking too hard against the floor. She leaned toward one of the suited men. "This is absurd," she said. "I've flown this route for years. I know how this works." He did not respond. His attention was fixed on his earpiece. Eleanor folded her arms, then unfolded them. She thought of her ex-husband, of the favors still owed, of the times a phone call had smoothed rough edges. She had not expected this. Not the stop, not the delay. Certainly not being ignored. Back in the conference room, Susan slid the tablet across the table. On the screen were timestamps, logs, a clean line of data. At 12:42 in the afternoon, she said a request was made through the cabin management system to initiate a secondary review. The justification field was left blank. Lillian glanced at the screen. "That's not standard." "No," Susan agreed. "It isn't." Susan leaned back. "Ms. Brooks, I want to be very clear. This review was not triggered by your behavior. It was triggered by an anomaly. A pattern." Lillian's eyes lifted. "What kind of pattern?" Susan hesitated, then decided. "The kind that gets airlines fined. The kind that costs people their certifications. The kind that doesn't disappear if everyone pretends nothing happened." Lillian exhaled slowly. "Then you understand why I didn't argue." "I do," Susan said. "And I appreciate it." The door opened. Captain Hall stepped in, removing his cap. His face was tight controlled. "We have a problem," he said. Susan turned. "Go on." "Operations confirmed the passenger profile," he said, "and legal wants the flight grounded until this is resolved." Outside, Eleanor stopped pacing. "Grounded," she repeated too loud. A gate agent shot her a warning look. In the cabin, the retired firefighter leaned toward the silver-haired woman. "Told you," he muttered. This wasn't small. The plane sat unmoving, tethered to the gate. Screens flickered. Departure time slid backward, then disappeared altogether. In the conference room, Susan closed the tablet. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice lower, now weighted. "I want to apologize. Not personally. Professionally. This should not have escalated the way it did." Lillian considered her. "Apologies matter," she said. "But corrections matter more." Susan nodded once. "Agreed." Captain Hall cleared his throat. "For what it's worth," he said, looking directly at Lillian, "I made the call to turn us back. No one forced my hand." Lillian met his eyes. She saw the years there. The decisions stacked one on top of another. "Then you did the right thing," she said, "even if it cost you time." He inclined his head, relieved. Outside, Eleanor's phone buzzed again. This time she answered. Her voice dropped. "Yes," she said. "No. I don't know why. They're overreacting." She listened, her face tightening. "What do you mean?" "Compliance is involved." She looked through the glass at the closed conference room, at the silhouettes inside. For the first time, uncertainty crept in, cold and unwelcome. Inside, Susan stood. "We're going to make an announcement," she said. "And then we're going to ask you how you want to proceed." Lillian rose with her. "I want the truth preserved," she said. "That's all. The rest follows." Susan held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. It usually does. Beyond the glass, the jet bridge lights reflected off the rain-dark tarmac. The plane waited. So did everyone on it. And whatever Eleanor Price thought she had set in motion was already moving in a direction she could no longer control. The announcement crackled through the cabin speakers, clearing its throat before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We are pausing departure for an operational review. Please remain seated. Thank you for your patience. No apology, no estimated time. Just the weight of authority settling into the aisles. The reaction was immediate and uneven. A low groan rolled from the back. Someone laughed once, sharp and humorless. Overhead bins creaked as passengers shifted beneath them. The plane had become a sealed room, and sealed rooms made people honest. Eleanor Price lowered herself back into her seat with a stiffness that felt unfamiliar. Her phone rested face down on her thigh, buzzing intermittently, the screen lighting up and dimming like a heartbeat she could not slow. She stared straight ahead, jaw-set lips pressed thin enough to disappear. She had lived her life moving forward, never backward. This felt like retreat. 2 rows behind her, the retired firefighter leaned toward the aisle. That tone, he murmured to no one in particular. That's not maintenance. His wife nodded. That's legal. Across the aisle, a man in his 70s folded his newspaper with deliberate care. I remember when they told us to stay seated like that, he said quietly. Usually meant someone had crossed a line. In the galley, the younger attendant stood, frozen hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. The older attendant touched his elbow, a grounding gesture. Breathe, he said under his breath. Follow procedure. What procedure? The younger man whispered. His eyes darted toward the cockpit door. No one trained us for this. The older attendant did not answer. His mind replayed the moment he had chosen the easier path, the one that had felt like de-escalation, and now felt like cowardice. He had been flying for 22 years. He had seen complaints dissolve and storms pass. This was different. This had teeth. On the jet bridge, Susan Calder stepped to the microphone at the gate desk. Her voice was calm, practiced. For those waiting to board connecting flights, we appreciate your patience. This aircraft will remain at the gate until further notice. She cut the mic and turned to Captain Hall. Legal wants a full freeze. Hall exhaled through his nose. Figures. They're already pulling logs, Susan said. Cabin actions, system access, communications. Everything, Hall said. It was not a question. Yes, Susan replied. Everything. Inside the conference room, Lillian Brooks sat alone now. The folder rested open in front of her, pages untouched. She stared at the wall instead, at a small scuff near the baseboard that someone had tried and failed to paint over. She thought of all the rooms like this she had sat in before. Government buildings, corporate offices, places where the furniture was bolted down because decisions were meant to be permanent. Her phone vibrated once. She did not look at it. Outside the room, Eleanor's voice rose despite her effort to keep it low. This is insane, she hissed into her phone. They stopped the whole plane. She listened, her eyes narrowing. No, I didn't do anything wrong. I asked a question. That's it. She paused. Color drained from her face. What do you mean? They're reviewing my travel history. In the cabin, phones finally came out. Not filming. Messaging. Quiet fast. A woman near the window typed with stiff fingers, sending a text to her daughter. Plane stopped. Something about civil rights. Not sure. A man in a baseball cap whispered to his seatmate, "You think it's about that lady they pulled off?" His seatmate shook his head. They didn't pull her. They asked her. The distinction mattered. People her age knew that. The cockpit door opened. Captain Hall stepped out. Posture straight eyes scanning the cabin. The hum of conversation died. Authority, when it entered a room, had a way of draining sound. "We're working through it," he said, not unkindly. "Thank you for your patience." Eleanor looked up at him, searching his face for something familiar. A sign, a wink. There was none. His gaze slid past her without recognition. Her phone buzzed again. She answered on the first ring. "Yes," she said, breath tight. "I'm still on the plane." She listened. "No, I can't just get off. They won't let anyone move." She swallowed. "What do you mean you've been contacted?" Back in the conference room. Susan Calder returned, tablet in hand. "Miss Brooks," she said, taking the chair across from her, "we need to update the record." Lillian nodded. "Go on." Susan's voice remained level, but her eyes had sharpened. The secondary review request originated from a cabin device assigned to the forward section. The user credentials belong to a flight attendant. However, the access pattern suggests external prompting. Lillian's fingers tapped once against the folder. "Pressure," she said. "Yes," Susan replied. "And there's more." Susan turned to the tablet. On the screen was a list. Dates, routes, notes. "This isn't isolated," she said. "There are at least 4 prior incidents involving similar circumstances. Same passenger, same tactic, different crews." Lillian studied the list. She felt something settle in her chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. "And no one stopped it," she said. "They didn't see it as a pattern," Susan said. "Until now." Lillian leaned back. "Patterns don't become visible until someone refuses to move." Susan's mouth curved just slightly. That's one way to put it. Outside, Eleanor stood abruptly, pressing the call button above her seat. The light blinked. No one came. She pressed it again. Harder. The younger attendant approached his face, pale. "Ma'am," he said, "please remain seated. I want to speak to whoever is in charge," Eleanor snapped. "Now!" The attendant glanced toward the galley. The older attendant shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Not now." Eleanor laughed, a short, brittle sound. "This is unbelievable," she said to the man across the aisle. "All this over nothing." The man did not respond. He looked past her toward the front, where the absence of motion had begun to feel deliberate. In the cockpit, a message flashed across the captain's tablet. "Legal hold confirmed. Do not depart. Preserve all records." Captain Hall closed his eyes for a brief second. He thought of the years he had flown without incident. He thought of the one decision that could undo all of them. He opened his eyes and set his jaw. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, an automatic adjustment that felt ominous in the stillness. Outside, Rain streaked down the windows in thin, uneven lines. Susan stood. "We're going to address the cabin," she said to Lillian. "Not names, not yet. But we're going to acknowledge the delay." Lillian rose with her. "Do it," she said. Silence breeds stories. Susan paused at the door. "Miss Brooks," she said, quieter now. "Once this goes public, it won't be contained." Lillian met her gaze. "It never is," she said. "That's the point." They stepped back onto the jet bridge together. Inside the cabin, heads turned as one. Eleanor felt it in her bones before she heard the footsteps. The sense that whatever she had believed she controlled had slipped beyond her reach. Susan took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "thank you for your continued patience. We are conducting a compliance review related to passenger handling procedures. This aircraft will remain grounded until the review is complete." Grounded. The word landed with a finality that made Eleanor's stomach drop. A man near the back let out a low whistle. "Well," he said. "That's something." Eleanor's phone buzzed again. She did not answer it this time. She stared at the seat back in front of her, the safety card tucked neatly into its pocket, and for the first time that day, the certainty she had carried so easily began to fracture. The first uniformed officer boarded quietly without announcement, and that was when the cabin truly understood this was no longer an inconvenience, but an investigation. Conversations died mid-sentence. A cough echoed too loudly. The officer's shoes made no sound on the carpet, yet every step felt counted. He paused near the cockpit, nodded once to Captain Hall, then continued down the aisle. Not toward Eleanor Price, not toward the galley. He stopped beside the conference room door, waiting. Eleanor noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything when power shifted. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. She leaned forward, craning just enough to see without looking obvious. The pearls at her neck clicked once, betraying her tension. The older attendant swallowed and straightened his shoulders. He had flown through storms that rattled the frame, medical emergencies that left blood on the floor, passengers who screamed and fought. None of that compared to this quiet. This silence was surgical. Susan Calder returned to the cabin with the officer at her side. She did not rush. She did not soften her posture. She stopped at the front, lifted the intercom, and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are continuing a compliance review involving passenger handling procedures earlier today. We ask that everyone remain seated. Law enforcement is present to ensure safety and documentation." Documentation. The word hung there, heavy and deliberate. A man near the window whispered, "Someone messed up." His seatmate replied, "Someone always does." Eleanor stood halfway before catching herself. She forced a smile that did not reach her eyes and addressed the nearest attendant. "This is excessive," she said, her voice pitched low, controlled. "I've done nothing wrong." The attendant did not answer. He looked past her at Susan and waited. Susan turned finally and walked toward Eleanor's row. The officer followed a half step behind. The aisle felt suddenly narrower. "Miss Price," Susan said, stopping beside her seat. "May I ask you to remain seated?" Eleanor's smile stiffened. I am seated. Susan's eyes flicked to Eleanor's white-knuckled grip on the armrest. And may I ask you not to interfere with the process? Interfere. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Interfere with what exactly? Susan did not raise her voice. With the review. Eleanor laughed softly, incredulous. You're grounding an entire plane over a misunderstanding. Susan met her gaze. We grounded the plane because of a pattern. That word again. Eleanor felt it like a slap. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Around them, passengers leaned in, pretending not to listen, failing. In the conference room, Lillian Brooks stood as the door opened. The officer stepped inside first, nodding politely. Ma'am, he said. Just here to observe. Susan followed, closing the door behind her. We're escalating, she said plainly. Lillian nodded once. I expected as much. Susan placed the tablet on the table and turned it toward her. New entries had appeared. Time stamps marching downward. We ran a cross-reference, she said. Same passenger, multiple flights, different airlines. Similar complaints, all resolved quietly. Quiet benefits the aggressor, Lillian said. Yes, Susan replied. It does. Susan hesitated, then added, there's also evidence of pre-boarding communication. Messages sent from Ms. Price's phone to a former colleague in our operations department. Lillian's eyes hardened just a fraction. So this wasn't spontaneous. No, Susan said. It was practiced. Outside the room, Eleanor's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then at Susan's back through the glass. She stood this time, fully unable to stop herself. This is harassment, she said loudly. I want my attorney. The officer turned calm, unhurried. Ma'am, you're free to contact counsel. For now, please sit. Do you know who I am? Eleanor snapped. The officer's expression did not change. Yes, he said. I know who you are today. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Eleanor sat. A murmur rippled through the cabin, thicker now. A woman with a cane whispered, That officer didn't flinch. Her husband replied, Means he's not guessing. Captain Hall stood in the aisle, arms folded, watching the exchange. His face was unreadable, but his shoulders carried the weight of command. He caught the older attendant's eye and gave a small nod. Stand firm. In the conference room, Susan leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, she said, we need to ask you something on record. Lillian clasped her hands. Ask. Earlier, when you were requested to step aside, you complied. Why? Lillian considered the question. Because I didn't need to prove anything in that moment, she said, and because resistance without leverage only feeds the narrative. Susan nodded slowly. And now the leverage exists, Lillian replied. Because you found it. Susan exhaled. Legal is recommending we separate Ms. Price from the flight. Lillian's gaze lifted. On what grounds? Interference with crew duties. Pattern of coercion. Potential civil rights violations. Susan said. Pending further review. Lillian did not smile. Do it by the book, she said. No spectacle. Susan's eyes softened just slightly. Understood. The door opened again. The officer gestured. We're ready." They stepped back into the cabin together. The atmosphere had shifted again, charged now, like air before lightning. Susan stopped beside Eleanor's row. "Miss Price," she said, "we're asking you to deplane at this time." Eleanor stared up at her. "You can't be serious." "I am," Susan replied. "You are not under arrest. You are being removed from this flight pending investigation." Eleanor's laugh came out sharp, fractured. "This is outrageous." No one echoed her. The silence was complete. The officer stepped forward, offering an arm not as restraint, but as inevitability. Eleanor hesitated, scanning faces for allies. She found none. Only eyes that had begun to see her differently. She stood smoothing her blazer with trembling hands. "This isn't over," she said, more to herself than anyone. Susan inclined her head. "No," she said. "It isn't." As Eleanor walked up the aisle, the pearls at her throat clicking too loudly. Now a man in his 70s spoke without looking at her. "Should have stayed in your seat." Eleanor flinched. At the front of the cabin, she paused, turned as if to say something more. Something, cutting something final. The officer opened the door. Cold air rushed in. She stepped out. The door closed behind her, with a definitive thud. In the sudden quiet, Lillian Brooks remained seated, hands folded, breathing steady. Around her, passengers exhaled, some realizing only now how tightly they had been holding themselves. Captain Hall picked up the intercom. His voice carried firm and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be resuming operations shortly." Shortly. Not immediately. Because some things once exposed required time to be set right. The plane did not move after the door closed. That was the first thing people noticed, not the absence of Eleanor Price, not the officer stepping back onto the jet bridge, but the stillness. The engines stayed quiet. The lights remained dimmed. Time for a moment refused to advance. Lillian Brooks sat where she was, hands folded, eyes forward. She felt the shift ripple through the cabin like a low tide pulling back. Fear gave way to curiosity. Curiosity edged into recognition. People began to reassemble the story in their minds, piece by piece, realizing they had been watching the wrong woman all along. Captain Hall remained near the cockpit door, speaking quietly into his headset. His voice was clipped, professional, stripped of anything unnecessary. He was receiving updates faster now. Operations, legal, corporate, all moving at once. The older attendant walked the aisle slower than usual, checking seatbelts, making eye contact. He stopped beside Lillian. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Thank you for your patience." She looked up at him. Really looked. The tightness around his eyes, the apology he could not voice. "You're doing your job," she said. "That matters." He swallowed and nodded, the gesture small but weighted. Across the aisle, the retired firefighter leaned toward his wife. "I've seen that look," he said under his breath. "On chiefs, when they realize they backed the wrong call." His wife nodded. "Takes guts to correct it." The younger attendant stood near the galley, shoulders hunched, replaying every moment in his head. He remembered the way Eleanor had spoken, the way he had stepped in front of Lillian without meaning to. He had thought he was preventing a scene. He hadn't realized he was becoming part of one. Susan Calder returned to the conference room, closing the door behind her. Lillian followed the folder tucked under her arm now. The officer remained outside, a quiet presence. Susan exhaled as soon as they were alone. "We're documenting everything," she said. "Crew statements, passenger accounts, device logs. This will be thorough." "It should be," Lillian replied. Susan hesitated, then sat. "I want to ask you something off the record." Lillian remained standing. "Go ahead." "When you boarded," Susan said, choosing her words carefully, "did you anticipate this?" Lillian considered. "I anticipated resistance," she said. "I did not anticipate escalation, but I prepared for the possibility." Susan looked up, prepared how Lillian set the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were notes, diagrams, printed emails, all neatly organized. "I've spent decades studying how systems fail," she said. "Not catastrophically, quietly, through small choices that seem harmless in isolation." Susan scanned the pages. Her eyebrows rose. "These are internal memos. Publicly accessible ones," Lillian said. "If you know where to look." Susan leaned back. "You're not just a passenger." "No," Lillian said evenly. "I'm not." Outside the room, Captain Hall's voice came over the intercom again. Lower now, more personal. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your continued patience. We are coordinating with our operations and compliance teams. We will update you shortly." Shortly again. The word had shifted meaning. It no longer implied delay. It implied consequence. A man in a suit near the front checked his watch for the 5th time, then stopped. He leaned back, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. "This," he murmured to no one, "is how careers end." In the cabin, conversations had resumed, but differently now. Quieter, more deliberate. People spoke in fragments, as if assembling a shared understanding. "I thought she was just, you know," a woman whispered, gesturing vaguely. Her seatmate replied. She was composed. "That's not nothing." The silver-haired woman clasped her purse tighter. "I've seen that kind of calm before," she said. "You don't learn it unless you've had to." The jet bridge door opened again. This time, 2 executives stepped aboard, not in uniform. Tailored suits, purpose in their stride. They spoke briefly with Susan, then with Captain Hall. The cabin watched without shame now. Susan returned to the conference room, closing the door behind her with care. "They're ready to speak with you," she said. Lillian nodded. "Here." At the gate office, Susan replied, "With counsel present." Lillian picked up her folder. "Good." They walked together through the jet bridge, past curious faces, pressed subtly toward the glass. The gate office was small, functional. A table, chairs, a wall clock ticking too loudly. One of the executives, a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a composed mouth, extended her hand. "Miss Brooks," she said. "I'm Karen Whitfield, Senior Vice President of Operations." Lillian shook her hand. Firm, measured. "Thank you for coming quickly." Karen gestured for her to sit. "We owe you that." They sat. Lawyers joined the table. Tablets lit up. Pens were uncapped. The machinery of accountability assembled itself. Karen spoke first. "We have reason to believe that a passenger exerted undue influence on crew members, resulting in improper handling of your seat assignment." Lillian listened without interrupting. Karen continued. "We also have reason to believe this is not an isolated incident." Lillian's eyes lifted. "What do you intend to do about it?" Karen did not flinch. "Investigate fully. Report findings to the appropriate authorities. Implement corrective measures." "And the crew?" Lillian asked. Karen's mouth tightened. "They will be retrained. Those who acted under pressure will be supported. Those who misused authority will be disciplined." Lillian nodded. "That distinction matters." Karen leaned forward. "Ms. Brooks," she said, lowering her voice, "before we proceed, we need to understand something. Your involvement in this industry goes beyond what our system initially flagged." Lillian met her gaze. The room held its breath. "Yes," Lillian said. "It does." Karen waited. She had spent her career in rooms where power revealed itself slowly. She recognized the moment. "I'm not here as a customer seeking compensation," Lillian continued. "I'm here because what happened today reflects a vulnerability in your operations, one that can be exploited. And has been." Karen's eyes sharpened. "Exploited by whom?" "By people who understand that pressure applied in the right place at the right moment goes unchecked," Lillian said, "until it doesn't." Silence settled over the table, heavy but not hostile. Recognition flickered from face to face. Outside, the plane remained grounded. Passengers waited, some impatient, some reflective. The engines were quiet, but something larger was building momentum. Karen closed her folder. "We need to talk," she said, "about your role in that vulnerability." Lillian folded her hands on the table. Her voice was calm, steady, unyielding. "Then it's time you knew exactly who I am." The clock on the wall ticked forward, loud in the stillness, as the story crossed the threshold from incident to reckoning. Lillian Brooks did not raise her voice when she spoke, and that was what unsettled the room most. "I'm here because I helped design the compliance architecture you're using right now," she said. "Not this airline specifically. The framework behind it." The words did not land all at once. They moved slowly across the table like fog, creeping in, touching one face at a time. Karen Whitfield did not react immediately. Years in operations had trained her not to, but her fingers paused on the edge of the folder. Just long enough. Susan Calder's posture shifted, her spine straightened, eyes narrowing with a new kind of focus. The lawyers at the table stopped writing. Karen leaned back. "You're saying you're a consultant?" Lillian shook her head. "No. I'm saying my firm built the backbone for federal-level passenger equity monitoring after the civil enforcement revisions of the late 1990s. My team advised the FAA task force. The system flagged this flight because it recognized a misuse pattern I helped define." Silence followed. Thick, heavy, earned. Karen exhaled slowly. "Your firm's name would have appeared in our disclosures." "It does," Lillian said. "Buried, because it's easier to credit software than people." Susan's lips parted slightly. "Brooks." "Adaptive systems," she said quietly. Lillian nodded once. The room recalibrated. Karen's expression changed, not into panic, not into apology, but into something closer to respect, edged with alarm. "Then you already know what this means." "I do," Lillian said, "and I know what it costs when it's ignored." Karen folded her hands. "Ms. Brooks," she said carefully, "you understand that this moves beyond a passenger complaint. That's why I stayed quiet until the system spoke first," Lillian replied. "Because once it did, no one could call this personal." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, "are you alleging intentional discrimination?" Lillian looked at him. Her gaze was steady, not accusatory. "I'm alleging structural vulnerability," she said, "which is more dangerous, because it allows intent to hide behind procedure." Susan felt a chill move up her arms. She had seen cases fall apart on intent. She had watched patterns dismissed because no one wanted to name them. Outside the gate office, Eleanor Price sat in a plastic chair, arms crossed, foot tapping despite herself. Her phone had finally gone silent. That frightened her more than the buzzing ever had. She watched airline staff pass without looking at her. She had always been looked at. She leaned toward a gate agent. "How long is this going to take?" she asked. The agent did not meet her eyes. "I don't have that information, ma'am," Eleanor scoffed. "Figures." Back inside, Karen nodded once. "Then here's what's going to happen," she said. "We're grounding this aircraft until our executive compliance committee signs off. We're filing a self-report, and we're opening a formal inquiry into Ms. Price's travel interactions." Lillian listened. She did not interrupt. She did not soften. And Karen continued, "We'll need you to provide testimony." Lillian's mouth curved slightly. Not a smile, a recognition. I expected that. Susan glanced between them. "There's something else," she said. The data pull revealed that Ms. Price contacted a former operations manager shortly before boarding. Karen's eyes sharpened. "That individual still has system access?" Susan nodded. "Not anymore. We locked it 20 minutes ago." Karen closed her eyes briefly. Good. The weight of it settled. This was no longer about a seat. It was about influence, about pressure applied in quiet corridors, about how often it had worked before. Karen looked back at Lillian. "You could have avoided this," she said. "Taken your seat back quietly. Asked for compensation." Lillian shook her head. Then nothing would change. Outside, the cabin buzzed with speculation. The retired firefighter leaned back, arms crossed, watching the jet bridge through the window. "I told you," he murmured to his wife. "That calm wasn't normal." His wife nodded. That was a woman who knew she didn't have to rush. The younger attendant sat in the jump seat, hands clasped, staring at the floor. The older attendant stood beside him. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "What happens next isn't about punishing you. It's about whether you learn." The younger man swallowed. "I thought I was de-escalating." "You were," the older man said gently. "Just not the right thing." In the gate office, Karen stood. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "we'll escort you back to the aircraft shortly. We'll make a brief announcement. Not details. Just acknowledgement." Lillian rose with her. "Good," she said. Transparency starts small. As they walked back down the jet bridge, Karen lowered her voice. You understand. She said that this will ripple. Lillian met her gaze. That's the point. The cabin fell quiet as they boarded. Heads turned openly now. No pretense, no shame. Susan walked ahead, Karen just behind her, Lillian between them. Captain Hall stood near the cockpit, cap in hand. He nodded to Lillian once. Respect, recognition. Susan took the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, thank you for your patience. We are continuing our compliance review. We can confirm that this flight will remain grounded until further notice. We appreciate your cooperation. A murmur rose, then fell. People absorbed it. Some sighed. Some nodded. Lillian took her seat. Not as before. The air around her had changed. Eleanor watched from the jet bridge, eyes narrowed, heart pounding. She saw the way the staff moved now, the way no one deferred to her. She stood abruptly. I want to leave, she said to the officer stationed nearby. He glanced at his tablet. You're free to do so, he said. Your belongings will be returned after inventory. Inventory. The word felt clinical. Cold. As Eleanor walked away, heels clicking too loudly, she caught a glimpse through the glass of Lillian, seated calmly, head turned slightly as she spoke to the man beside her. No triumph, no satisfaction, just control. Back in the cabin, the retired firefighter leaned across the aisle. Ma'am, he said to Lillian, voice respectful. I just want to say thank you. Lillian met his eyes. For what? For not letting it slide, he said. Some of us are tired of watching that happen. She nodded once. So am I. Outside rain began to fall harder, streaking the windows. The plane remained still, grounded. Not because of weather, not because of mechanics, but because something older, deeper, had finally been forced into the open. And everyone aboard felt it. The waiting became physical. It settled into muscles, into breath, into the way people shifted in their seats, and then stopped shifting altogether, as if motion itself might provoke another consequence. The aircraft sat tethered to the gate rain, sliding down the windows in thin, relentless lines. The runway lights blurred into halos of white and amber. Time stretched. Inside the cabin, conversations thinned to murmurs. Not complaints now, but speculation edged with unease. People her age had lived long enough to recognize when a delay was no longer logistical, but moral. A man in his late 60s closed his eyes and rested his head back. This feels like when the factory shut down back in Ohio, he said quietly to no one in particular. You knew something bigger was happening, but nobody would say it out loud yet. His seatmate nodded. And when they finally did, everything changed. At the front, Captain Hall stood near the cockpit, arms folded, gaze fixed forward. He had received 3 calls in the last 10 minutes. None of them told him to prepare for departure. Each one asked him to hold, to wait, to preserve. Susan Calder moved between the galley and the jet bridge. Her steps measured her posture unyielding. She spoke in low tones to people who did not ask questions, only confirmed instructions. Compliance had a sound. It was quieter than authority, but it carried farther. Lillian Brooks remained seated, hands folded over her folder. She watched the rain. She thought about the first time she had been told to wait like this, decades earlier in a courthouse hallway that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. She remembered how waiting had felt then, like being erased. This was different. This waiting was deliberate, chosen. Across the aisle, the retired firefighter shifted and cleared his throat. "You mind if I ask you something?" he said. Lillian turned toward him. "Go ahead." "You always this calm?" he asked, not mocking, curious. She considered. "No," she said. "I just learned where panic gets you." He nodded slowly. "Same," he said. "Fire teaches you that." The younger attendant hovered near the galley, listening without appearing to. He watched Lillian, then the older attendant, then the captain. He saw the chain now, the way decisions traveled, the way one misstep could echo through an entire system. He leaned toward the older attendant. "Do you think we're in trouble?" he whispered. The older man looked at him. "We're in a lesson," he said. "Whether it becomes trouble depends on what you do with it." On the jet bridge, Eleanor Price sat alone. Now her handbag on the floor at her feet, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She had made 3 calls. 2 went to voicemail. 1 ended too quickly. She stared at the glass, at the blurred shape of the aircraft beyond it. She had never been on the outside looking in. The sensation was unfamiliar, disorienting. She replayed the moment she had spoken up, the confidence in her voice, the certainty that the room would bend. It always had. Her phone vibrated at last. She answered on the first ring. "Yes," she said, relief flooding her voice before she could stop it. She listened. Her face tightened. "What do you mean they're cooperating?" Silence stretched. "No," she said. "No, that's not how this works." She ended the call without goodbye. Back inside the cabin, a woman with a cane struggled to stand. The man beside her rose to help, steadying her elbow. The older attendant hurried over. "Please remain seated," he said gently. "We'll update you as soon as we can." The woman sighed and sat back down. "I've been patient my whole life," she said softly. "I suppose I can manage a little longer." The cockpit door opened. Captain Hall stepped out again, his face set in a way that quieted the cabin before he spoke. He moved toward Susan, who met him halfway. "They want a cabin-level statement," he said. Susan nodded. "Acknowledgement, not detail." He glanced toward Lillian. "And her." "She stays," Susan said. "Exactly where she is." Captain Hall picked up the intercom. He paused just long enough for the cabin to still itself completely. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, measured. "Thank you for your continued patience. I want to be transparent with you. This delay is the result of an internal compliance review involving how a situation was handled earlier today. That review is ongoing. Your safety and your rights as passengers are our priority." He let the words settle. "We understand this is frustrating," he continued, "but it's important we do this the right way." He clicked off the microphone. A low murmur followed. Not anger. Recognition. A man near the back nodded to his wife. "That took guts," he said. "Most captains would have blamed the weather." His wife squeezed his hand. "I'm glad he didn't." Susan moved again, this time toward Lillian. She crouched, slightly lowering her voice. "They're convening executive compliance now," she said. In person. Lillian nodded. Good. They'll want to speak to you again, Susan added. And they'll want to move quickly. They can, Lillian said. Speed doesn't scare me. Susan studied her for a moment. You know, she said quietly, there are people who would have leveraged this differently. Lillian met her gaze. I'm not interested in leverage, she said. I'm interested in repair. Susan straightened. Then you're the right person to be here. Outside emergency lights flashed briefly near the terminal, then went dark. Not an emergency, a presence, a reminder. Eleanor watched from a distance as two executives crossed the tarmac toward the gate. She recognized one of them. Her stomach dropped. She had sat across from that woman once, years ago, in a charity boardroom. The woman had not liked her then either. Eleanor stood abruptly. I need to speak with someone, she said to the officer nearby. The officer glanced at his tablet. You've been advised to wait, he said. For what? Eleanor snapped. For instruction, he replied, unruffled. The word instruction scraped at her nerves. Inside the cabin, Lillian closed her eyes for a brief moment. She thought of the engineers she had worked with, who had begged her to slow down, to stop pushing. She thought of the memos she had written, warning that systems without accountability would be used against the vulnerable. She thought of how often she had been ignored. She opened her eyes as Susan returned with Karen Whitfield at her side. Karen's expression was composed, but there was no mistaking the gravity beneath it. Ms. Brooks. Karen said quietly, stopping beside her seat. The committee is assembled. Lillian stood. Around her, the cabin watched without pretending otherwise. As she stepped into the aisle, the retired firefighter spoke again. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying just enough. Whatever happens next, you did the right thing. Lillian paused and looked at him. We'll see, she said. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel right in the moment. Karen gestured toward the front. This way. As they moved toward the jet bridge, the cabin remained silent. Not out of fear, out of respect. Outside rain continued to fall, steady and unyielding. The plane stayed where it was grounded, not by malfunction, but by choice. And somewhere between the gate and the glass-walled offices beyond it, a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. What came next would not restore a schedule. It would reshape a system. The executive conference room overlooked the runway like a watchtower, glass walls revealing the grounded aircraft below its lights, reflecting off rain-slick concrete. Inside, the air was controlled cool, stripped of ornament. A long table, 12 chairs, all filled. No small talk, no wasted movement. Karen Whitfield took her seat at the head without ceremony. To her right, legal counsel arranged tablets and yellow pads. To her left, operations compliance risk. A clock ticked audible deliberate. When Lillian Brooks entered the room, did not rise. It did not need to. Eyes tracked her instead, measuring the way she walked, the steadiness of her shoulders, the calm that did not ask permission. Thank you for coming, Karen said. We'll proceed. Lillian sat. She placed her folder on the table closed. She did not open it. Not yet. Karen folded her hands. We are convened as an executive compliance committee under our voluntary disclosure policy. This meeting is on record. Ms. Brooks, you understand your role here is both as a passenger and as a subject matter expert. I do, Lillian said. A man in a navy suit cleared his throat. For the record, he said, Can you state your affiliation? Lillian met his gaze. Founder and principal architect, Brooks Adaptive Systems. Retired from daily operations 5 years ago. Still advising on oversight. Several heads dipped. One woman's pen paused mid-stroke. Karen nodded. We have reviewed preliminary findings, she said. They indicate improper influence on crew decision-making and misuse of procedural discretion. Say it plainly, Lillian said, not unkindly. Karen did. A passenger coerced the system. A murmur ran the length of the table, stopped by a raised hand. Legal spoke next. We need to establish scope. Ms. Brooks, your assertion is that this vulnerability is not isolated to one airline. Yes, Lillian said, and not limited to one role. It thrives where accountability is diffuse. Operations leaned forward. Are you saying our training failed? I'm saying your incentives did, Lillian replied. You taught people to avoid risk without defining which risks matter. Silence, then the faintest exhale from someone who knew it was true. Compliance spoke. We locked access and froze credentials. We're cooperating with regulators. Good, Lillian said. Cooperation is the floor, not the ceiling. Karen watched her closely. What do you want us to do? It was not a challenge. It was an opening. Lillian rested her hands on the table. First, acknowledge what happened in plain language, not customer service language, truth language. Legal stiffened. Public statements require courage, Lillian finished, and specificity. If you hedge, you teach the wrong lesson. Karen raised a hand, cutting off objections. Continue. Second, Lillian said, separate de-escalation from appeasement in your training. They are not the same. Your crews confuse them because you reward silence over accuracy. Operations scribbled furiously. Third, Lillian continued, install a live audit for discretionary overrides. Not to punish, to illuminate. Patterns don't survive light. Risk shifted in his chair. That will slow operations. Safety slows operations, Lillian said. You accept that. Dignity should be no different. Karen leaned back, studying her. You're asking us to change how power flows on an aircraft. Yes, Lillian said. I'm asking you to make it visible. The clock ticked. Rain streaked down the glass behind them, the plane still waiting. Legal spoke again, cautious, and the passenger removed from the flight. Lillian's eyes lifted. Handle her by the book, she said. No spectacle, no vendetta. Document, review. If you bar her, do it because the policy requires it, not because the moment invites it. Karen nodded once. That aligns with our approach. Compliance hesitated. There's pressure, she said, from outside, to keep this quiet. Lillian's mouth curved slightly. There always is. Karen turned to her. You understand the exposure? I do, Lillian said. I also understand the cost of pretending there isn't any. A pause. Then Karen closed her folder. We will ground the aircraft until the initial corrective actions are signed. We will issue a statement today. We will commit to an external review And we will ask you to remain involved. Lillian considered. In what capacity? Independent oversight, Karen said. Temporary, with authority. Several heads snapped up. Legal started to object, then stopped when Karen's gaze cut him off. Lillian exhaled slowly. I will not be your shield, she said. I will be your mirror. Karen nodded. Agreed. Outside the room, Eleanor Price stood with an officer, arms folded tight across her chest. She had been informed formally that she would not reboard. She stared through the glass at the conference table, at the silhouettes inside at Lillian, seated among them like she belonged there. Because she did. Eleanor felt the old reflex rise, the urge to speak, to reframe, to twist. She swallowed it. There was no one left to impress. Inside, the meeting pressed on harder now. Dates were set, memos drafted, a timeline drawn. The machinery of reform groaned into motion, reluctant but moving. Karen stood at last. We'll reconvene in 48 hours, she said. Ms. Brooks, thank you. Lillian rose. I'll return to the aircraft, she said. People are waiting. Karen nodded. So are consequences. They walked together to the door. As Lillian stepped into the hallway, Susan Calder waited. They agreed, Susan said, quietly. They would? Lillian replied, once they saw themselves clearly. Back on the jet bridge, the cabin lights brightened a fraction, a subtle signal. Captain Hall's voice came over the intercom, steadier now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are preparing to resume boarding procedures pending final clearance. A ripple moved through the cabin. Relief, curiosity, respect. Lillian re-entered, returning to her seat amid open gazes. The retired firefighter nodded once. The silver-haired woman smiled, small and genuine. Eleanor was gone. The plane remained still for another measured stretch. Then finally the engines whispered awake, low and controlled. Outside, rain eased, not stopping, just softening. Lillian closed her eyes for a moment, not in triumph, but in resolve. The hardest part was never the confrontation. It was the follow-through. And that at last had begun. The aircraft began to move at last, slow at first, the tug's pull barely perceptible, then firmer as the wheels aligned with the taxiway. A collective breath released through the cabin. Not relief exactly, but acknowledgement. Something had shifted, and movement was its first visible proof. Lillian Brooks felt it through the seat before she saw it outside. The low vibration under her feet, the subtle sough as the plane turned. She kept her gaze forward, the folder resting on her lap like an anchor. Around her, people adjusted belts, clicked, shoulders eased. Conversation did not return to normal. It reorganized itself around what had happened. Captain Hall's voice came over the intercom, again quieter now, almost reflective. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are cleared to taxi. Flight time will be adjusted accordingly. No jokes, no apologies, just fact. Across the aisle, the retired firefighter exhaled through his nose. Never seen anything like that, he said softly. His wife nodded. You don't forget days like this. The younger attendant took his position near the galley posture, straighter than before. He caught Lillian's eye for a brief moment, then looked away, embarrassed and grateful all at once. He would replay this flight in his mind for years. He knew that now. As the plane inched forward, phones buzzed again. Messages, not videos. People texting, spouses, children, friends. Trying to explain something that felt larger than delay. A woman typed slowly, deleting and retyping. Finally, she sent, "I think I just watched something important happen." Lillian felt her own phone vibrate. She ignored it. She had learned long ago that immediacy was the enemy of clarity. The runway lights passed in steady rhythm. Outside, rain thinned to a mist, the sky lifting just enough to suggest a break. Inside, the cabin settled into a strange calm, the kind that followed storms when everyone counted what was still standing. Susan Calder appeared beside Lillian's seat, lowering herself into the empty one across the aisle for a moment. "They're drafting the statement," she said quietly. Legal tried to soften the language. Karen shut that down. Lillian nodded. "Good. They want to acknowledge the removal," Susan added. "And the investigation." "Names matter," Lillian said. "But timing matters more." Susan watched her for a second. "You don't seem tired." Lillian's mouth curved faint. "I am," she said. "Just not surprised." Susan smiled, then stood as the seatbelt sign chimed again. "We'll be in the air soon," she said. "I wanted you to hear it from me." "Thank you," Lillian replied. Susan hesitated. "For what it's worth," she said, "I've been in compliance 20 years. This is the first time I've seen someone refuse to make it about themselves." Lillian looked out the window. "It's always about more than one person," she said. The engines grew louder. The plane paused at the runway's edge. For a brief moment, everything went still again. Then the thrust came, pressing bodies back, pulling the ground away. As they lifted, a hush fell. The city slipped beneath them, lights dissolving into patterns. Gravity loosened its grip. A woman across the aisle wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by the tears she had not expected. "I don't know why that got to me," she whispered to her seatmate. Her seatmate squeezed her hand. "Because it was real," she said. "And we don't see enough of that anymore." At cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Movement resumed, careful, quieter than before. Lillian finally checked her phone. Messages stacked unread. One stood out, marked urgent, from a number she recognized. She opened it. "We saw the alert. We're with you. Do not rush. We'll follow your lead." She closed the message without replying. In the forward galley, the older attendant poured coffee with deliberate care. He had spoken briefly with Captain Hall during the climb. They had agreed on very little, but on one thing they were aligned. This flight would be remembered. The younger attendant approached Lillian again, stopping at a respectful distance. "Ma'am," he said, voice low. "I wanted to say I handled things wrong earlier." Lillian looked up at him. "You handled them the way you were trained," she said. He swallowed. "That doesn't feel like an excuse anymore." "It shouldn't," Lillian replied. "But it can be a beginning." He nodded, absorbing that, then moved on. As drinks were served, conversations deepened. A man in his 70s leaned across the aisle to Lillian. "I marched once," he said abruptly. "Long time ago. Thought we were done with all this." Lillian met his gaze. "We never finish," she said. "We just pass the work forward." He sat back, thoughtful. Somewhere ahead, a child laughed, the sound light and unburdened. It cut through the tension like sunlight. Lillian closed her eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to catalogue the sensations. The steady hum, the press of the seat, the awareness of being watched, not with suspicion now, but with something closer to trust. She thought of the engineers who would read the new memos, the trainers who would rewrite scripts, the quiet meetings that would follow this loud day. She thought of Eleanor Price somewhere below, confronting a world that no longer bent. When Lillian opened her eyes, the retired firefighter was watching her. "You didn't have to stay," he said. She nodded. "I know. But you did." "Yes." He smiled, then small but genuine. "My granddaughter's going to fly next month," he said. "First time alone. I feel better about it now." Lillian felt that land deeper than any praise. The captain's voice came one last time, softer than before. "We'll be on the ground shortly. Thank you again for your patience." As descent began, the cabin leaned forward, collective motion, guided by unseen hands. Outside the clouds parted, revealing land, then runway, then terminal lights. Lillian gathered her folder, tucking it under her arm. Around her, people prepared to disembark, movements, unhurried faces changed, not transformed, aware. When the wheels touched down, applause did not break out. This was not that kind of moment. Instead, there was a shared stillness, a quiet agreement that something had been carried across the sky along with them. As the plane slowed and turned toward the gate, Lillian allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction, not because she had won, but because she had stayed. And sometimes that was enough to change the direction of things. The aircraft rolled into the gate with a muted finality, tires humming against concrete engines, winding down like a long-held breath finally released. The cabin lights brightened, revealing faces that looked different than they had hours earlier, not happier, not relieved, awake. Lillian Brooks remained seated as the chime sounded. She watched people stand, reach for bags, pause, then sit again, as if unsure how to exit a moment that had changed shape around them. The aisle filled slowly. Courtesy replaced impatience. Small kindnesses appeared where none had been required before. Captain Hall stood at the cockpit door cap under his arm, shaking hands as passengers passed. He met Lillian's eyes and nodded. No ceremony, no words. The kind of respect that did not need them. When it was her turn, Lillian rose and stepped into the aisle. The retired firefighter held her folder for her, without asking, handing it back with a quiet smile. "Take care," he said. "You too," she replied, and meant it. At the threshold, the older attendant stood straighter than he had at boarding. "Miss Brooks," he said softly, "I won't forget today." "Neither will the system," she said. "That's how change sticks." Outside, the terminal buzzed with ordinary life. Screens flickered. Shoes squeaked. Announcements echoed. The familiar noise felt altered, as if tuned to a different frequency. Susan Calder walked beside Lillian for a few steps, then slowed. "The statement will be public by morning," Susan said. "Plain language. No hedging." "Good," Lillian said. "They're creating an independent review panel," Susan continued. "They want you to chair it." Lillian stopped near a window overlooking the ramp. Rain had stopped completely. The pavement gleamed. "I'll advise," she said. "I won't own it." Susan nodded understanding. "We'll make that clear." They parted without ceremony. Work did not need applause. At baggage claim, Lillian stood among strangers who felt less strange now. A woman with silver hair approached, hands folded around her purse. "I just wanted to say," she began, then paused, searching for the right words. "I'm glad you were there." Lillian smiled gently. "So am I." The woman nodded and stepped back, satisfied. Later in the quiet of the car, Lillian placed the folder on the passenger seat and rested her hands on the steering wheel without turning the key. She allowed herself a moment to feel it all at once. The weight, the release, the responsibility that followed both. She thought of the memos that would be rewritten, the trainings, restructured, the quiet conversations that would finally become explicit. She thought of the next flight and the one after that. Her phone buzzed. A message from Karen Whitfield, brief and unadorned. "We begin tomorrow." "Thank you." Lillian set the phone down. In another part of the terminal, Eleanor Price exited through a side corridor, escorted but unrestrained. Her heels clicked too loudly. Her phone lay heavy in her bag, unanswered messages piling like sediment. She avoided reflective surfaces. She avoided eyes. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. She paused once, then kept walking. Consequences, she was learning, did not need an audience to be real. Days passed. The story traveled. Not as spectacle, as record. A statement appeared unsoftened, acknowledging improper influence, systemic vulnerability, and corrective action. Names were included where policy required them. Processes were named, commitments dated, accountability assigned, training rooms filled. Scripts changed. Overrides lit up on dashboards where darkness had once been convenient. The system learned what it had been missing. On another morning, another flight Lillian boarded quietly. No incident, no delay. Just a seat confirmed, respected. A young attendant smiled, not deferential, not cautious. Professional, as it should be. As the plane climbed, Lillian looked out at the receding ground. She did not feel victorious. She felt steady. She knew this would not end the work. It would simply make the next choice clearer. The engines settled into their rhythm. The cabin relaxed. Somewhere behind her, a child laughed, unburdened, the sound rising above the hum. Lillian closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, carrying forward what mattered and leaving behind what did not. If this story moved you, let it stay with you as you move through your own day. Tap like to support stories that choose clarity over noise. Subscribe to follow what accountability looks like when it works. And share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Stand for dignity.